Our stories have tremendous power. And one story that we're often told is that our lives are completely random, that life can't be understood logically. And as our world becomes ever more advanced, the more unpredictable things seem, and the more anxious and frustrated we become. But what if we could tell a different story? One that tells us that our world is actually made up of patterns on top of patterns, that history only repeats itself, that there's an astonishing level of order in the universe, and if you watch closely, what we call chaos is just patterns we haven't yet noticed. And underlying all of it is a level of organization and symmetry that holds it all together. The idea that the universe follows predictable patterns is actually very old, and one of the earliest sources comes from an ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician named Pythagoras, a man who lived between 570 and 495 BC. This is the story of a man whose life was clouded by legend, who was born the son of a merchant, and who rose to prominence for his remarkable insights, and who would go on to influence countless thinkers and scientists all around the world. But who was he? And what can his life tell us about the patterns we find in our lives? When you think of Pythagoras, you probably think of an old bearded man from your math class, where you learned the Pythagorean theorem. It's a simple equation that's taught in every classroom, but we rarely hear about his other contributions to history. Pythagoras was born on the Greek island of Samos, but before he was born, it's said that his father visited the Oracle of Delphi, who predicted that his wife would give birth to a child who would grow up to be supremely wise and beneficial to humanity. After he was born, he grew up in Samos, which at the time was a major center of trade, and it was known for its advanced architecture and engineering. And even from an early age, Pythagoras had unusually progressive ideas for his time. He believed in gender equality, and later in his life, he would become one of the first teachers to openly accept women students, and he insisted that women should be able to learn math and philosophy just as well as men. This during a time when only men were allowed to pursue education. And his school would have many prominent women, including a woman named Theano, who many consider to be the world's first woman mathematician, a woman that he would eventually marry. Pythagoras was also responsible for some truly amazing advances in science. Many people don't realize that Pythagoras was the first person to suggest that the Earth was round and shaped like a sphere. He also discovered that the morning star and the evening star were actually the same object in the sky, and in fact, they weren't stars at all. They're the planet Venus. Pythagoras' ideas were also tremendously influential on Nicholas Copernicus and his development of the heliocentric model of the solar system, where the Earth and all the planets spin around the sun at the center. Today, we accept these insights as common sense, but at the time, these ideas were revolutionary, and he made these discoveries 500 years before the birth of Christ, without telescopes and without any modern science or technology. How is this possible? According to many accounts, in 535 BC, Pythagoras left Greece at the age of 18, and he went to Egypt. It was here that he joined the inner circle of the Egyptian priesthood, and from this, he gained insights that were incredibly advanced for his time. He would study geometry, astronomy, and music. At the age of 56, Pythagoras left Egypt and settled in the city of Croton. It was here that he established a private school where he could share his teachings with a select group of students. These involved secret practices and esoteric rites involving science and mathematics. This would form the basis for what many consider to be his most important work, numerology. It's one of the oldest systems of knowledge, and it was exactly these insights that would lead Pythagoras to the belief that numbers had a divine essence, and that to connect with numbers was to communicate with the divine. It's because of this work that he's widely considered to be the father of Western numerology as it's practiced today. But what exactly is numerology? To understand it, we have to look at 4 basic ideas. The first idea is that our universe is mathematical. Pythagoras believed that numbers are the most basic elements in nature, and understanding them is the gateway to unlocking all of reality. According to Pythagoras, there are 2 basic levels to our universe. The first level is the physical world. This is the world that we can see and touch and experience with our senses. But one level below this is an abstract and mathematical structure that underlies our entire universe, a world of numbers and geometry. This led him to the famous statement that everything is number. This idea might not seem all that radical to us today, but it's had a profound impact on Western science, and it's influenced a wide range of thinkers, including Plato, Euclid, and Sir Isaac Newton. The idea that our reality can be understood with numbers has formed the basis for much of what we consider modern scientific thinking. In fact, it's one of the most central assumptions in science. We can see this in the field of physics, where we found that there are about 20 numbers, called mathematical constants, that make our universe what it is. These are very specific numbers that consistently show up everywhere, again and again, and they include the speed of light, the strength of gravity, and the electromagnetic force. No one truly knows why, but if these numbers were even a little different from what they are now, life as we know it would be impossible. This has led many scientists to say that our reality is a fine-tuned universe. The second concept in numerology is the idea that our universe moves through cycles. When we look at nature, we see constant birth and rebirth, from the cycles of day and night, the seasons in the year, and even the cycles of life and death. This is something that's long been understood in Chinese numerology as well. We see this in an idea called wuxing, also known as the 5 elements of nature. These elements were believed to move in a continuous cycle, repeating endlessly and giving rise to everything we see all around us. And our own modern science has uncovered all sorts of cycles in nature, including the lunar cycles of the moon, planetary cycles, and the nitrogen cycle. Our world follows a basic rhythm with patterns that replay themselves over and over again. But it's not just nature, it also applies to you. According to numerology, our lives follow a cycle called an epicycle that lasts 9 years. Each year of your life has its own unique vibration and energy and its own approach that leads to growth and happiness. And it's only when you work with the energy of your cycle that you can really take advantage of the opportunities around you. But when you work against that energy, you find yourself struggling to move ahead. What makes this even harder is that we live in a world that's obsessed with early achievement, and we often put enormous pressure on ourselves to find success. And if it doesn't happen as quickly as we'd like, we become anxious and frustrated. But notice how nature doesn't force itself to meet deadlines. Nature just unfolds on its own, in its own time, the way it's supposed to. And it takes an uncommon level of wisdom and patience to wait for things to reveal themselves without forcing them when the timing isn't right. So what does this mean for you? It means that your numbers reveal a divine timing in your life, a time for education or career, a time for relationships, or a time for family. And because life presents so many important choices, it's essential to understand your 9-year cycle. The third idea is the discovery that music and numbers are intimately connected. Pythagoras found that different notes in music have a mathematical relationship to each other. In fact, the language of music is the language of fractions and ratios. He found that 3 mathematical relationships were especially beautiful to listen to. He called them octaves, fifths, and fourths. Of course, these are all numbers. These insights led Pythagoras to the idea that the universe itself is also vibrating with its own music. And in the same way that every string in a harp vibrates at its own pitch, so does every planet in space. Pythagoras believed that as these celestial bodies move through space, they create beautiful music, but not in the usual sense, because it can't be heard by human ears. He called this idea musica universalis, or the music of the spheres. Pythagoras believed that this was the highest form of music, in the sense that it followed a perfect mathematical harmony and precision. What's interesting is that this idea isn't as far-fetched as you might think. Recently, NASA recorded sounds coming from different objects in space. In a project called the Van Allen Probes mission, all sorts of high-pitched sounds were captured, but we can't hear them because they're made by electric and magnetic fields, which follow mathematical patterns. What this suggests is that there's a very basic underlying mathematical organization in the universe, but it's not just planets in space. According to numerology, you have a unique vibration too, and so does every human being and creature on Earth. If you really think about it, we often talk about being in tune with people we get along with, or being on the same wavelength. We also talk about certain people resonating with us. But isn't it interesting that tuning, wavelength, and resonance are all ideas related to vibration? The idea that everything in the universe has its own vibration also finds support in a scientific concept known as string theory. According to string theory, inside every object we find billions of tiny atoms, and every atom is made up of even smaller particles, a nucleus, which is made up of protons and neutrons, and electrons, which float around it. Protons and neutrons are made up of even smaller elements called quarks. And if we could look even deeper into these quarks, we'd find that they're made of tiny vibrating strands of energy called strings. String theory tells us that in much the same way that you can make different musical notes by playing different strings on a guitar, the vibration of tiny strings inside an atom makes up all the different things we see all around us. These tiny strings might vibrate in one way to make up the atoms in this kitten, and another vibration of tiny strings could make up the atoms in this car. Physicist Brian Greene says that when we look at nature through the lens of string theory, we find that the universe is a grand cosmic symphony. But isn't this just a different way of describing Pythagoras' idea of the music of the spheres? But while string theory was discovered as recently as 1968, numerology described the universe in terms of vibration more than 2,000 years ago. The fourth idea in numerology is known as metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls. Pythagoras believed that the soul is immortal, that it's the part of us that makes us who we are, and which survives after we die. Essentially, the soul is trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth, and the only way to break free from this cycle is to understand the lessons that we've been brought here to learn. And if we don't learn those lessons, then we're doomed to repeat the same problems over and over again until we do. Most of the pain and suffering we experience in our lives is a direct result of ignoring our life lessons. The idea of the soul is a compelling one, and it shows up in almost every culture in the world. But is there any evidence to suggest that souls exist? In order to understand the soul, we have to look at the meaning of death. Historically, doctors define death as the moment when we stop breathing and the heart stops beating. And up until about 70 years ago, there was no way to reverse this process. But now, what we've found is that through modern medicine, we can stretch this moment in time. Dr. Sam Parnia studies what happens when people are brought back to life. And he's found that when people return from the brink of death, they all describe very similar things. They talk about feeling a profound sense of peace, seeing a warm, bright light. But many of them also describe doctors and nurses working on them with incredible accuracy and with amazing detail, even when they should have been unconscious. One of the most amazing examples of this comes from an orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Tony Sikoria, who was struck by lightning in 1994. After feeling the powerful shock of electricity, he describes in incredible detail seeing his own body on the ground as he floated above it. It felt incredible, and in that moment, he believed that he was dead. Suddenly, there was a jarring feeling that brought him back into his body, and he came back to life. But he would never be the same. Something very odd changed in him after the accident. He had a new desire to hear piano music all the time. It was like a new part of his brain suddenly switched on and became intensely interested in learning to play the piano. Today, he's a renowned composer, and even though he describes himself as a skeptical man of science, today he's absolutely certain that our consciousness survives death. We often call these near-death experiences, or NDEs, but Dr. Parnia says that that's the wrong way to describe what's happening, because these patients aren't near death, they're actually clinically dead, and they've been brought back to life. There's still a lot of research left to be done, but his pioneering work suggests the possibility of a soul which continues beyond the physical body. Pythagoras' biggest legacy is the idea that numbers can reveal the patterns and cycles of our lives. And at the heart of numerology is the idea that each of us is born in a particular time and place, which makes us totally unique in the universe. And each of us is a one-of-a-kind combination of experiences with individual strengths and talents. And every single one of us is formed in a way that has never happened before and will never happen again. And one of the goals of this channel is to help you understand your numbers, because as we'll see, that's the key to unlocking who you are, why you're here, and the untapped abilities that already exist within you. So this was my very first YouTube video. Believe it or not, it took me about 70 hours to record and edit this, which I did completely on my own. So thanks for watching all the way to the end and for supporting my work. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. It really helps me to bring more content like this to you, and it marks the beginning of what I hope will be a channel that aims to bring you the best tools and information on numerology and intuition. And so if you want to learn more about what your numbers can tell you about the patterns in your life, then I hope you'll come with me on this new YouTube journey. And if there's a topic that you want me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.